The rain battered my Seattle apartment window, but it couldn't mute the scream of my phone. We're done. I can't hide anymore. Caleb's text sliced through me, a blade of truth I wasn't ready to face. I'd fallen for my best friend's son, crossed every line I swore I wouldn't. Now, with Mark's knock echoing at my door, the weight of our secret threatened to bury me. I'm Lucas, 32, a graphic designer scraping by after a brutal breakup. Mark, my best friend since college, offered me his guest room while I got back on my feet. His generosity was a lifeline, but it came with a complication. His son, Caleb, 22, home from college. Caleb wasn't the shy kid I remembered. He was sharp, confident, openly gay, with a presence that filled every room. I noticed it the moment he walked in, his eyes catching mine with an intensity that made my pulse jump. It started innocently enough. Late one night, Mark was out, and Caleb and I ended up sharing a bottle of wine in the kitchen. The conversation flowed. His dreams of becoming a writer, my struggles to rebuild after my ex left. His laugh was easy, his questions piercing. Somewhere between the second glass and a debate about art, our hands brushed. Neither of us pulled away. The air shifted, charged with something I couldn't name but felt in my bones. I didn't expect you to be so real, Caleb said, his voice low, eyes locked on mine. I should have laughed it off, changed the subject. Instead, I leaned closer, drawn to the way he saw me. Not as Mark's friend, but as someone else entirely. Before I knew it, our lips met, tentative at first, then urgent. The kiss was a spark, igniting a fire I hadn't known was waiting. My heart raced, guilt clawing at the edges, but I couldn't stop. Not then. We pulled back, breathless, the silence heavy. This can't happen, I whispered, more to myself than to him. Caleb's gaze didn't waver. Why not? He asked, his voice steady, challenging. Because of my dad? He doesn't have to know. His words were a dare, and I was too weak to resist. The thrill of it, the secrecy, the forbidden pull, overpowered the voice screaming that this was wrong. The next few days were a blur of stolen glances and brushed fingertips. Caleb was bold, slipping me a smile when Mark wasn't looking, his hand grazing mine as he passed me coffee. Each moment was a risk, a step closer to a line we couldn't uncross. Mark, oblivious, treated me like always, joking, trusting, planning barbecues like we were still the same old friends. But every time I laughed with him, guilt twisted in my gut. I was betraying the one person who'd always had my back. One evening, Mark came home early, his keys jangling as he stepped into the kitchen. Caleb and I were mid-conversation, too close, our voices low. I jumped back, heart pounding, as Mark raised an eyebrow. "What's with you two?" he asked, half laughing, but his eyes lingered on me a second too long. I forced a grin, muttering something about work stress, but my hands shook as I grabbed a glass of water. Caleb, unfazed, changed the topic, his calm a stark contrast to the storm inside me. That night, alone in the guest room, I stared at the ceiling, replaying the kiss, Caleb's words, Mark's suspicion. I told myself to end it, to walk away, before it went too far. But even as I thought it, I knew I was lying to myself. Caleb had woken something in me, a hunger, a truth I'd buried for years. I wasn't just attracted to him. I was unraveling, questioning who I was and what I was willing to risk. And with every passing day, the stakes were getting higher. The days after that first kiss were a tightrope walk, every step pulling me deeper into a dance I couldn't escape. Caleb and I were magnets, drawn together despite the danger. Each stolen moment, his hand brushing mine as we passed in the hallway. A whispered comment when Mark turned away. Felt like a pulse of electricity. But the thrill came with a shadow. The growing weight of betraying Mark, my best friend, who trusted me without question. Caleb was relentless, his confidence a stark contrast to my hesitation. One afternoon, while Mark was at work, Caleb cornered me in the kitchen. "You're thinking too much," he said, his voice low, teasing, as he stepped closer. My breath caught, torn between pushing him away and pulling him in. "We shouldn't," I muttered, but my resolve was paper-thin. He leaned in, his lips grazing my ear as he whispered, "No one's here." The air crackled, and before I could stop myself, I kissed him again, the urgency drowning out my guilt for a fleeting moment. We became experts at secrecy, carving out moments when Mark was out or asleep. Late-night talks turned into confessions. My fear of being seen for who I was, Caleb's frustration with a world that judged him for loving freely. He told me about the taunts he'd faced at college, the way he'd learned to wear his identity like armor. His strength pulled me in deeper, but every time I saw Mark's easy smile, the guilt clawed harder. I was living a lie, and it was eating me alive. The tension spiked one evening at a local bar. Mark had dragged us out for drinks, insisting we needed a break. The place was crowded, the noise a shield for Caleb's subtle glances. But as we grabbed our beers, a guy at the bar muttered something under his breath, his sneer cutting through the din. Caleb's jaw tightened, but he brushed it off, his hand squeezing mine under the table. I froze, the stranger's judgment a reminder of the world outside our bubble. Mark, oblivious, kept talking about work, but I could barely focus, the weight of our secret pressing down. Back at the house, the close call lingered. Mark went to bed early, leaving Caleb and me alone in the living room. "You're scared," Caleb said, his voice soft but pointed. "Of what people think." I wanted to deny it, but he was right. I'd spent years dodging questions about my dating life, hiding parts of myself to fit in. Caleb's openness was a mirror, showing me what I'd buried. "I'm scared of losing Mark," I admitted, my voice barely audible. Caleb stepped closer, his hand on my arm. "You won't lose him if we're careful," he said, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of doubt. The next morning, Mark's mood shifted. He was quieter at breakfast, his usual banter replaced by short replies. When I caught him watching me, his gaze was sharp, like he was piecing something together. "You okay, Lucas?" he asked, his tone casual but probing. My stomach twisted, but I nodded, forcing a laugh. "Just tired," I said, avoiding his eyes. Caleb across the table stayed silent, his foot nudging mine under the table, a reckless move that sent my pulse racing. Later, alone with Caleb, I snapped. "We're slipping," I said, pacing the room. Mark's starting to notice. Caleb shrugged, his confidence unshaken. "He doesn't know anything. Relax." But I couldn't. The secrecy was a noose tightening around me, and Caleb's nonchalance only made it worse. "This isn't a game," I said, my voice rising. "If he finds out, it's over. Everything." Caleb's expression softened, but he didn't back down. "I'm not letting you go," he said, his words a mix of defiance and need. That night, as I lay awake, the walls seemed to close in. I was caught between Caleb's pull and the life I'd built with Mark. Every choice felt like a step toward disaster. But stopping meant facing the truth about myself, a truth I wasn't sure I could handle. The secret was no longer just about us. It was about who I was becoming, and whether I could live with the cost. The secret Caleb and I shared was a ticking bomb, and I could feel the seconds slipping away. Each stolen moment, a glance, a touch, pushed us closer to the edge, but Caleb's boldness only grew. He thrived on the risk, while I drowned in the fear of what we'd lose if Mark found out. The guilt was no longer a whisper. It was a roar, deafening every time I saw my best friend's trusting smile. One evening, Caleb texted me to meet him at a quiet park near the house. It was late, the kind of hour where the world felt too still. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the screen. Every instinct screamed to stay away, to end this before it spiraled further. But the pull of Caleb, his certainty, his fearlessness, was stronger. I went. He was waiting by a bench, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp. "You're late," he said, his voice teasing, but there was an edge to it. I stopped a few feet away, my hands shoved in my pockets. "We need to talk," I said, my voice low. "This can't keep going." Caleb's smile faded, replaced by a stubborn set to his jaw. "You don't mean that," he said, stepping closer. "You feel it too, Lucas. You want this." He wasn't wrong, and that was the problem. The connection between us was undeniable, a current that surged every time we were near. But it came at a cost I couldn't ignore. "Mark's starting to suspect," I said, my words sharp with frustration. "And the world out there—" I gestured vaguely, remembering the bar, the stranger's sneer, the weight of judgment that followed us. "It's not as simple as you think." Caleb's eyes darkened. "I'm done hiding who I am," he said, his voice steady but laced with anger. "I thought you were too." His words hit like a punch, exposing the truth I'd been dodging. I wasn't just scared of losing Mark. I was scared of facing myself. Years of keeping my attraction to men buried, of playing it safe, had built a cage I didn't know how to escape. Caleb was forcing me to confront it, and I wasn't ready. "Then what?" I snapped, my voice rising. "We keep sneaking around until Mark catches us? Until he hates me?" Caleb stepped closer, his hand reaching for mine, but I pulled back. "You're not the one who has to lose everything," I said, my chest tight. "Mark's been my family. You're his son. This isn't just about us." For the first time, Caleb's confidence faltered, his expression softening. "I don't want to hurt him either," he admitted, "but I can't pretend I don't feel this." The air between us was thick, the silence heavy with unspoken truths. I wanted to give in, to let his words pull me back into the rush of our connection. But the reality was suffocating. "We're playing with fire," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Caleb didn't respond, just looked at me, his eyes searching for something I wasn't sure I could give. The next day, the tension followed me like a shadow. Mark was quieter than usual, his usual warmth replaced by a distracted edge. At breakfast, he asked about my plans, but his tone was off, like he was testing me. Caleb, sitting across from me, kept his eyes down, but I could feel his presence like a weight. When Mark left for work, I turned to Caleb, my voice low. "We need to stop. Now." He shook his head, his jaw tight. "You don't get to decide that alone," he said, his words sharp. "I'm not giving up on this." That night, my phone lit up with a text from Caleb. "We're done. I can't keep hiding." The words hit like a wave, leaving me breathless. I stared at the screen, torn between relief and devastation. He was right. We couldn't keep this up. But the thought of losing him, of facing the void he'd leave, was unbearable. I typed a reply, then deleted it, my hands shaking. The secret was unraveling, and I wasn't ready for what came next. Caleb's text, "We're done. I can't keep hiding," burned into my mind, a final warning that our secret was crumbling. I sat in the dark, the glow of my phone the only light, my heart pounding with dread. Mark's trust, our friendship, everything I'd taken for granted was slipping through my fingers. And yet, part of me still ached for Caleb, for the way he'd made me feel alive, even if it was wrong. The next morning, Mark was already in the kitchen when I came down, his coffee mug untouched, his gaze fixed on me as I entered. The air felt heavy, like the moment before a storm breaks. "Morning," I said, forcing a casual tone, but my voice cracked. He didn't smile, didn't return the greeting. Instead, he leaned back, arms crossed, his silence louder than any accusation. "Something's off with you, Lucas," he said finally, his voice low but sharp. "And with Caleb? What's going on?" My stomach dropped. I opened my mouth to deflect, to lie like I had 100 times before, but the words stuck in my throat. His eyes, usually warm, were cold, searching, like he already knew the answer but needed me to say it. "Nothing's going on," I managed, but my hands betrayed me, clenching at my sides. Mark's jaw tightened, and for a moment, I thought he'd let it go. Then Caleb walked in, his steps slowing as he sensed the tension. He glanced at me, then at his dad, and the room seemed to shrink around us. "Sit down, both of you," Mark said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Caleb hesitated, then took a chair, his usual confidence replaced by a guarded stillness. I sat, my heart racing, every nerve screaming that this was it, the moment everything fell apart. Mark leaned forward, his hands flat on the table. "I'm not stupid," he said, his voice steady, but laced with hurt. "I've seen the way you two act, the looks, the whispers. So tell me the truth. What's been going on?" His words were a blade, cutting through the lies I'd built to protect myself. I glanced at Caleb, hoping for a signal, a way out, but he just stared at the table, his silence deafening. I swallowed hard, my mouth dry. "Mark, it's not—" I started, but he cut me off. "Don't lie to me, Lucas. Not after everything we've been through." His voice broke slightly, and that small crack shattered me. This was Mark, my best friend, the one who'd been there through every crisis, who'd opened his home to me, and I'd betrayed him. Caleb spoke up, his voice quiet but firm. "It's my fault," he said, lifting his eyes to meet Mark's. "I pushed it. I care about him." The words hung in the air, raw and unfiltered. My chest tightened, a mix of relief and horror washing over me. He'd said it, laid it bare, and there was no going back. Mark's face crumpled, not with anger, but with something worse. Disappointment. He looked at me, his eyes searching for the friend he thought he knew. "You were like my brother," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "How could you do this?" The question wasn't just about Caleb. It was about trust, about the years we'd built together, now reduced to ashes. I wanted to explain, to tell him it wasn't planned, that I was drowning in my own confusion. But the words wouldn't come. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice breaking. It sounded hollow, useless against the weight of what I'd done. Mark shook his head, standing abruptly. "I need time," he said, his voice thick with emotion. He walked out, the door closing with a soft thud that felt like a gunshot. Caleb and I sat in silence, the space between us vast despite being inches apart. "You didn't have to say that," I said finally, my voice hoarse. He looked at me, his expression unreadable. I wasn't going to lie anymore, he said. Not to him, not to myself. His words stung, a reminder of his courage and my cowardice. He stood, his shoulders tense. I need to go, he said, and before I could respond, he was gone, leaving me alone with the wreckage of our choices. That night, I lay awake, replaying Mark's words, Caleb's confession. The moment everything shattered. The guilt was suffocating, but so was the truth I'd been avoiding. I'd fallen for Caleb, not just because of him, but because he'd forced me to see myself. Now, with Mark's trust broken and Caleb pulling away, I was left with nothing but the consequences of my own fear. The fallout from Mark's confrontation left me hollow, like a house stripped bare after a storm. His words, "You were like my brother," echoed in my head, each syllable a reminder of the trust I'd shattered. Caleb's absence was just as heavy. After his confession, he'd pulled back, leaving only silence. I was alone, grappling with the wreckage of my choices and the truth I'd spent years dodging. I couldn't keep hiding who I was. The next morning, I packed my things, the weight of Mark's disappointment making every movement feel like wading through mud. He was in the kitchen when I came down, his back to me, the silence louder than any argument. "I'm leaving," I said, my voice barely steady. He didn't turn, just nodded, his shoulders tense. "I think that's best," he said, his tone flat but laced with pain. I wanted to apologize again, to beg for forgiveness, but the words felt empty. I'd crossed a line, and no amount of regret could undo it. I found a cheap motel across town, the kind of place where no one asks questions. Lying on the stiff bed, staring at the cracked ceiling, I replayed everything, every glance with Caleb, every lie to Mark. The guilt was relentless, but beneath it was something else, a flicker of clarity. Caleb had forced me to face the part of myself I'd buried, the attraction I'd ignored to fit into a world that felt safer. Now, with everything lost, I had to decide who I wanted to be. Days turned into weeks, each one a battle to keep moving. I texted Caleb once a simple, "I'm sorry," but he didn't reply. I couldn't blame him. He'd been ready to live openly, while I'd been too scared to even admit the truth to myself. Mark didn't reach out either, and the silence from both of them was a punishment I deserved. But it also pushed me to confront what I'd been running from. One evening, scrolling through my phone, I stumbled across a local LGBTQ support group. The idea of walking into a room full of strangers terrified me, but staying trapped in my own head was worse. I went, my heart pounding as I stepped into the community center. The group was small, a mix of people sharing stories of rejection, love, and resilience. I didn't speak that first night, but listening to them, their struggles, their victories, felt like a lifeline. For the first time, I saw a path forward, one where I didn't have to hide. Over the next few meetings, I started opening up. I told them about Caleb, about Mark, about the shame that had kept me silent for years. Their nods, their quiet encouragement, chipped away at the walls I'd built. One older member, a man named David, shared his own story of losing friends when he came out. "You can't control how others react," he said, his voice steady, "but you can choose to live for yourself." His words stuck with me, a reminder that hiding wasn't living, it was surviving. I started small, testing what it meant to be honest. I told a coworker I was gay, bracing for judgment, but finding only a shrug and a smile. I joined online forums, connecting with others who'd faced similar battles. Each step felt like shedding a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying. But the pain of losing Mark and Caleb lingered, a scar that reminded me of the cost of my choices. One night, I sat down and wrote Mark a letter. I didn't expect forgiveness, but I needed to own my truth. I apologized for betraying him, for letting fear drive me to hurt someone who'd been family. I told him I was trying to be better, to live honestly, even if it meant starting over. I didn't send it, not yet, but writing it felt like a promise to myself. Caleb's absence was harder to reconcile. I missed his fire, his refusal to bend to the world's rules, but I knew he'd been right to walk away. We'd been reckless, and the fallout had hurt more than just us. I hoped he was finding his own path, living the truth he'd always embraced. Months later, at a group meeting, I shared my story in full. The words came haltingly at first, but as I spoke, I felt lighter, like I was finally stepping out of the shadows. The group listened, their support a quiet strength. When I finished, a young woman across the circle smiled. "You're going to be okay," she said. And for the first time, I believed it. The road ahead wasn't easy. Mark's silence remained, a wound that might never heal. But I was learning to live for myself, to embrace the truth I'd spent so long denying. The cost had been high: friendship, love, trust. But it had forced me to face who I was. And in that truth, I found a fragile hope, a chance to rebuild, not in the shadows, but in the light.